Are we ready?
Yes. Okay.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lyons. I'm kind of new to this group, but you guys have some really great programming. I currently write for Harlequin Love Inspired, and I'm doing Amish romance, but my background is in historical romance, which is my first love. And I have like five of those books out, but I have my 10th book is coming out in April 2021. And I've been writing it forever and published since 2000. Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's it.
Yeah, don't mute yourself. You're fine. Karin?
Hi, I am Karin Beery. I actually had my first book published in 2018 with Elk Lake Publishing. My last book came out last year, and that's the one that's featured today. You can see it way back. It's called Practically Married. I actually love to read historical romance, but I have no desire to do the research necessary to make it accurate. So I took my favorite historical romance trope, which is a marriage of convenience, and wanted to see what it would be like today. So that's what Practically Married is about. I have a follow-up novella that I'll be self-publishing hopefully April of next year. And just have some other manuscripts that my agent is trying to sell right now. And I just like to tell people that I write hopeful fiction with a healthy dose of romance.
Right. Mary? Did Mary get on? Okay, sorry. Sandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Merville Hart. My heart is to write for historical romances. I have 3 Civil War romances out, and my featured novel tonight is Musket in My Hands. That's a Civil War romance. And I am writing my next series. That's a Civil War. It is about the spying that went on in the Civil War. So I think that's an aspect that a lot of people don't know about. I also have some other novellas out in other collections, and I'm just happy to be here with you tonight.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I guess we'll go ahead and start with the questions. So, and you all can answer in any order you want. Where do you all find inspiration for your stories? I know I hear the Civil War, Amish, that kind of stuff. Where do you all find inspiration?
Well, I'll start because I kind of mentioned one of it. I love the historical romance. And so part of it was just taking a concept that fits in historical and trying to make it fit in contemporary and thinking about what would it take to make that happen. But because I write contemporary, literally anywhere. One had a dream, and there was a little aspect to the dream that I thought was really cool. Another one is I'm just a huge football fan and was inspired just by Tim Tebow and his faith and things like that. I'm like, what if there was someone like that was ended up in a story? So for me as contemporary, it can literally be anything from a Facebook post to a newspaper clipping to something I overhear somebody talk about in the supermarket. And Mary Connealy's here. She's one of my favorite historical romance authors.
I see you, Mary.
Hi, Mary. Oh, she's still muted.
Cindy, are you able to unmute her? There we go.
Hi.
Hi, Mary. Would you mind introducing yourself real quick, and then we'll go back to the question.
This is you can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. I'll say introduce myself.
Yes.
My name is Mary Connealy. I write romantic comedy with cowboys, and my 64th book just came out. So I've been at it for a while, and I'm from Nebraska, and I'm married to my high school sweetheart, who I call my own personal romantic cowboy hero, and we're going to be married 44 years in January. So, what else? Anything you want to know?
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So the question that I asked is, we're just getting started, but where do you find inspiration for your stories?
Well, I wrote for 10 years before I got my first book published. And at the end of that 10 years, I had 20 finished books on my computer when I finally got the first one sold. And it was a novel called Petticoat Ranch that was romantic comedy with cowboys. And I don't know if the timing was just right or the book, I was finally learned enough to write a good book, but I think that I could bring some authenticity also to that Western tone, just because I grew up, I lived a rural life and I knew cows and just, you know, Western life. So maybe that's why it's sold, but anyway, then they wanted more of them. And so I get my inspiration in a lot of ways just from my own life. So.
Well, I can go next. I find that inspiration comes to me in a variety of ways. I might go to a historical, an old house or a battleground and not get any stories. And then I go around the corner and I see a statue or read a plaque, and all of a sudden I am inspired. So it comes to me in the strangest ways. And if I actually went, this is a fun story. I knew there was a story waiting for me in Gettysburg. I knew that Gettysburg was going to be figured in one of my stories, but I didn't know what the story was. So my husband and I went to find it. And I walked the battlefields, and I figured out early on I wanted a Tennessee soldier. And I knew she was a Gettysburg seamstress, but I couldn't figure out the story. And I went to the museums and I thought, oh, all the hospitals. This is the location for the story. No, that wasn't the location for the story. Then I started walking the streets of the town, and I realized what all the nightmare that the townspeople went through. And then I knew what my story was. So the rebel in my house is I found the story by going to Gettysburg, and it's really an amazing way to find a story. It was just so much fun. I love it. I am a seat of the pants kind of writer, and it's like being a detective. It's an adventure. I love it.
Yeah, I agree with Sandra. My inspiration a lot of times comes from places I've traveled to. All of my books are New York State sets. So my historicals are set in the Adirondacks and the Catskills, and my little Women of Surprise series, which I call the little books that could, because they're still doing very well. They're based on an actual town called Surprise in the Catskills, and each book is based on, and they were not happy about this, my sisters and myself. So each of us got our own book, and they're like, I'm not like that. And I'm like, well, it's historical and it's fiction. So you are. But anyways, yeah, I agree with Sandra too. You travel places and you see something and it's a spark. And I think in particular with the historicals, it was that way. With the contemporaries, well, you think that would be easier to do because we live in contemporary times, but Amish was like writing a whole new lifestyle, because they live so differently than we do, and yet it's kind of historical in contemporary times, and the blend. So that's where I get my inspiration from. Actual things and people and places. Oh, I can't hear
Chelsea,
you.
you're muted.
Who's muted?
Chelsea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get you. Hold on, Chelsea. I have to find your name in this list. So. Yeah, everybody don't mute yourself, panel members, because
I apologize. I have a newborn and I heard her screaming. So I was like yelling for my husband to bring her up here, and he didn't hear me. So sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So I saw a question in the comments that was asking if you all draw your inspiration for your locations, like if they're real or made up, but it sounds like all of yours are real locations.
I do actual locations, but I have a lot of fictitious towns. Like I will name the area and then make up the town. And the only reason I do that, except for the town of surprise, was that I don't want a reader saying to me, well, that's not what my town is like. And then you kind of have to say, well, I use creative license, so I guess I do a combination.
I do the same thing. There's a town, it's Boyne City, and then there's Boyne Falls. And I like the area, and I wanted to use the area because it adds a lot of just natural conflict. It's a very rural place. So I just created Boyne Heights. So it has a lot of the aspects, but as I describe the town, I'm actually thinking of another little town nearby. So I'm describing that one. So if you can find the sound that I'm thinking about, you'll see all of the landmarks, but I just give it a different name.
That way, if you get some details wrong, you're still good.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's fictional.
Well, for me, I use historical, and I do like a ton of research to try to get it as accurate as I can. So I do use real locations. The only time I didn't, something that isn't published yet, I tried my hand at suspense. I had so much fun writing that too, because I didn't know who the killer was until they showed up. But that one I put, because something negative happened and I kind of wanted to do a series, I created that town. I didn't want to make really bad things happen in a really nice town.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your responses to that. Another question I see you all answered in there. I'm going to ask the questions that are in the chat, so you all don't have to answer them in the chat. But do you all edit as you write or complete a story and then work on editing? So what's kind of your process when you're writing?
Well, I'm just starting a book right now. So, and it's a book one of a 3-book series. So, you're trying to launch what's going to be a 3-book series. I write the beginning, and then I write the beginning again, and I write the beginning again my goal is 1,000 words a day. So I keep writing it until I start to be happy with the beginning, and then I edge out. So I go back some yesterday and pull it through. And sometimes I'll stop and go back to the beginning and edit all the way through again, because I think starting is just about the hardest thing. I mean, it's easy to start telling your story, but to make the beginning really jump takes a lot of work, and you don't always know where you're jumping to right at first. So I do a lot of editing as I write.
Yeah, I edit as I write too, and I agree with Mary. I think the beginning of the book, like the first 3 chapters, seems to take the longest, because that's kind of, not only with Harlequin, you have to do synopsis and the first 3 chapters for every book you do, and then get that approved. So not only does it have to make sense to you, but it has to hook the reader and it has to hook the editor. So a lot of effort goes into those first 3 chapters, but I really do. I edit as I write all the time. And I think it takes a little bit longer. Maybe it kind of takes away from that natural flow to just like sit down and pour the words out. But I don't write like that. I have to kind of have it be perfect before I move on, which sometimes is frustrating, but in the end, I think it saves me a little bit more time in the editorial process.
And see, I consider myself an editor who writes. Once I started editing, I discovered that I actually love it. I think first drafts are just about the most evil thing in the world. I hate them. So I just have to get a terrible first draft done. Well, once I have that draft done, I can start editing, and I love that process. So even if my actual manuscript is going to be 70 to 80,000 words, I consider a first draft complete at 50 or 60,000, because then I can start the editing process and I'll start adding information in. But writing to me is torture. Editing is fun. So get the writing done, then go to the editing.
Well, for me, I tend to go back over what I did most recently, like the last chapter, the last scene, and I end up editing that and then going on. If I go back too far, then while I agree the first 3 chapters are hard to do, it seems like I spend a lot of time on those, and then I start writing after I get past that, I write more. But I find that it slows down the process, the creativity for me if I do too much editing. So it is helpful for me to just get it on paper and then go back and start, because things happen later that, then if this is going to happen here, I need to do something back here. You can do that later. You can just keep going.
Okay. What advice do you have for someone who continues to edit like constantly and they never get it done? I saw your response there, Patty. Sandra, would you like to start? So what advice would you have?
Okay, I would say, try to, for me, that doesn't work for me. So I have, because it stilts my progress. So I would do a minimal amount that you can do and feel okay, but just that creative flow, once it gets going, it doesn't like, for me, on my own self, it doesn't like to stop and go back. Because it just starts going and building and building and building. And the next thing comes and the next thing. But do the least amount until you get to the end of the first draft. Do the least amount you can to feel good about. And then that's how I work. But somebody else is probably gonna completely disagree.
There's no right way or wrong way. There's just what works for you. Yeah. So, there's not, you can't say, oh, but that's wrong. No, that works for you. So you got to embrace it. So what I would say, the first book that I ever got published, which is probably the 15th book, I had this moment in it where I had 3 groups at least all coming to this collision. I mean, the good guys and the bad guys and some help from somewhere else. And I think there was a 4th group. And they finally all collided in this moment on top of this mountain in Petticoat Ranch. And it's like everything I've been building, the whole book too, comes into this collision right here. I just could not get it, all the threads to come in at just the right moment. And I just kept writing and writing and writing that scene until finally I just needed to get it over, and I could not get it over. So I had the hero grab the heroine and throw her over his horse and just gallop away. And I call it my getting down off the mountain thing. And you can kind of tell when you're not making progress anymore. And sometimes you just gotta go. You just like, I can't do this scene right. I gotta do it wrong. I gotta get out of here. And then you come back and you fix it, maybe. But just sometimes you just got to power through into the next scene, push the story forward. That doesn't mean you're done, because you can go back and fix it. But so that's what I always remember, because I find myself doing that. And especially like if I've got a really hard scene coming, I can tell I'm dreading it. And I can tell I'm backing up and editing more and working on all this stuff just so I won't have to write this really hard scene. And that's when I'm kind of aware of myself doing that now. And I just know I got to get through it. Even if you write, 100 words and it ends up being 2 chapters, you just got to get through it. And so if you find yourself revising too much, do that. Try that. Just power through it and come back and fix it later.
And see, I would say that's interesting, because for me, if I'm stuck and I'm doing an editorial go around, I kind of have to sometimes just step aside, like put the work down, and then think about it, and then contemplate it, procrastinate it, go back and work on it. I think when in my beginning part of my career, I think the question was stuck on edits, and I edited a lot, and you never think that it's right. And that's why to this day, when my book is published, I never go back and read it, because I'm going to be like still editing, So, but sometimes you might just have to take a step back from the work too, and then let it just percolate in your mind. So that would be my advice. See, we're all different. That's interesting.
As long as you can finish that first draft, because that's the hard part, is finishing the book. There's a lot of people who start writing and never finish writing. So if the editing process is preventing you from writing, like Mary said, just write a bad scene because you can always fix it later. And I've done that before, and I've gone back and found out that I actually really liked that scene because by forcing myself just to put something on paper, I came up with something that I liked, and I was like, oh, I'll just cut that scene out later. I just need the word count. And it stayed in the book, and it actually spawned another couple of scenes. So
Yeah.
as long as you're finishing it, there is no right or wrong way to do it.
Right. Every writer's process is different. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's true.
All of those sound really good though, like really help. And sometimes depending, like in your book, you might need to take a step back from this scene, or you might need to just power through another scene, or you might need like just use some of those different methods for different parts, but just keep going essentially.
Yep.
I love that. Okay, well, thank you. Let me see. Do you have to have a picture of each character to write about them? This is a question from Janice in the comments. So do you all visualize your characters? Do you have a like an avatar for your characters, or how do you develop your characters?
I like to have a picture. I can spend a whole day on Google looking for, but you have to be very careful because sometimes you will type in something that you think is a very innocent description of a person and you'll get some very uninnocent pictures. But I like it. And then you have something to go back to, and I might like this model's hair and this model's eyes, but I like the way that this person, and so it just kind of gives me an idea so I don't forget who I'm writing about. So
Yeah, some authors do, gosh, I remember taking tons of these classes, collages, they do the character collage with magazine cutouts and things like that. I have a general idea of what they look like. I don't necessarily that's not necessarily my process to do the collage. But yeah, I have an idea of what they're gonna look like. And I don't do pictures up on my wall. I should though, but that's a good idea. But then you see, if you get in Googling, then you get lost and your day is done, so. At least for me.
I do not have a picture that I don't cut out. I know people do those picture boards. I say whatever works for you, but for me, I kind of do have I see them in my mind. I do have an idea of what they look like, and as I write the story, it gets clearer. That picture gets clearer and clearer and clearer until I really know them. And then that's what makes the second draft a lot better because you can go back and write that. But what I do is I have a calendar of the year that it is, so that I know if it's Sunday or if it's Wednesday. I always have that hanging on my wall. And it is like I just turn my head and see it. And okay, we're a week later. So that I read so many books where it's like, I could tell the author got lost in the
Timeline.
week because it was just they didn't follow. I mean, months passed in their writing, and then all of a sudden it started in spring and it's still just June. So that's important to me.
I don't usually have a picture, but Bethany House likes me to send in kind of suggest scenes that work for a cover and suggest pictures. So a lot of times when the book's all the way over, then I will go and as part of that process of sending them a little bit of ideas what to put on the cover, I'll find a picture and I'll use that. So I don't start out with that. I know I told my editor this a few years ago. I told her just from now on, just assume every hero I ever have looks like Henry Cavill when he's Superman. And she says, oh yeah, I can do that. That's no problem. So tall, dark, and handsome, that's 90% of the men. And then the women, you need to get a little more creative with sometimes because there's like 3 hair colors. So anyway, yeah, I don't usually work with a picture until right at the end.
Okay, there's another question in the comments from Deborah. She started writing her latest book by writing scenes and then putting them together. Do you all write like that? Is that something anyone's tried?
I was just talking to a lady. I'm on a blog called Petticoats and Pistols. and I was talking to, we're just in general talking about writing and on the email loop that we have. And she said she writes the beginning and like 3 explosive scenes and the end. And then she just starts writing backward and forward until those scenes all connect. And she's written many, many, many books. So it's just one of those examples of whatever works for you. Because I had never done that. I don't even know what's going to happen in the future. Hardly. I start writing. Just, yeah. So no, I don't. But I know of people that do that very successfully. So
I do not do that now. But my very first book, I remember staring at page 1 for a long time. And so I knew what was going to happen in chapter 13. So I went and I wrote chapter 13, and it just released the whole story for me. Then I was able to start in chapter 1 and write the story. So if you're stuck, whatever works, I think that's a great idea. Plus, you'll be able to arrange it. I mean, Jim Rupert, you heard him. He said he had a whiteboard with scenes here, boom, 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 and he arranges them. So you're in very good company, Debbie.
Yeah, I use a plot board. I'm working on a synopsis right now for the next book, and I have like pivotal scenes already in my head. So when I'm doing the synopsis, I just can kind of pull the whole story together. But when I actually write the book, I work off of my plot board, and that is every chapter in order. So it's kind of the same way he was talking about doing it, but I have it on a board, not on my wall. But I have to be sequential.
I'll chime in as the oddball again. I am not much of a plotter. I love characters. Not surprising, I write, women's fiction and romance. And so I just like to really know who my characters are. And I start with, I want them in point A, and they need to get to point B. And I want 1, 2, and 3 things to happen. So I'm just going to start them at point A, and let's see what I have to do to force them to go through those things. And sometimes I end up tweaking, but I just kind of think about, if these are the 2 types of characters, how are they going to react? How are these things going to happen? And so I just kind of try to throw things at them so that I can manipulate their lives into where I want them to go. Then when I do the editing, which I like, I'll go back and make sure that I've got, different plot points and things like that. But for me, it's all about starting with the people and making sure that they're doing things that their personalities would lead them to do.
All right, so kind of along the lines of putting things together, Mary, earlier you mentioned having a book or having a series and knowing there are going to be 3 books in a series. How do you all decide when your book is going to turn into a series, or how you plan out a series? How do you know when you're going to have one?
Well, I write 3-book series. That's just what I do.
Okay.
So it's usually 3 women or 3 men, 3 sisters or 3 brothers, or sometimes there's another connection between them. But I've written a couple standalone books in my life. That isn't the way I work. And even when I was writing a standalone book, I thought, hey, if I gave her 2 sisters, I could have 2 more books out of this. So that's just what I do. And maybe I should try to shake things up a little. Maybe I should, I don't know what.
I agree with you.
They don't have to be sisters. Come on.
Yeah, I think all my book series are in terms of 3s. Whether or not the publisher buys all 3 is a whole nother ballgame. But for the most part, I always think in books in 3s. That's so weird. Mary, you do the same thing. But yeah, it's sisters, it's cousins, it's brothers, it's, community people. Yeah, everybody gets their own book.
Yeah, I was reading
Oh, go ahead.
I was reading a Karin Whittemire book, and it was the Archer brothers. And there was these other brothers, and at the end she just kind of wrapped the whole book up, and I saw her later and I said, there were 2 more books, aren't you gonna write them? And she said, well, I think I solved all their problems. Yeah, it's so easy, come on. So that's just my reflex, and she doesn't do that. And not lots of people don't. So,
Well,
anyway.
thank you for that, because I love her Archer Brothers series. So I'm glad you convinced her to write some more.
Isn't there an Archer Brothers and then like a novella or something?
Yes. So there's.
It's not near enough. I love those books. I could read more of those. Come on.
I'm still just waiting to sell manuscripts for number 3, so I don't have anything to contribute to the conversation.
Well, for me, I'm writing, I'm almost to the end of book 1 of a 3, and I had to sit down and figure out my 1, 2, and 3 were to write a proposal. It really helps to know where you're going from the beginning, at least as far as that goes, and that really helps me, and I'm very excited about this series.
That's great. So another question from the comments. What do you all see are the pros and cons of critique groups? So are you all in critique groups, and do you really use them?
Karin and I are
Hey, I
shaking our heads.
see a lot of this.
I was for a long time, but I'm not anymore. The group I was with kind of dissolved, and they were great. I really learned to write from those ladies, and maybe they learned something from me. But Christy Barrett, if you know who that is, she was one of them. We were all unpublished back then, and I don't know. It was really valuable, but I don't have time to do it anymore, and maybe it's for the worse for it. But I still have time. So anyway.
Well, for me, I am in a critique group, and I love my critique group. We are so close. I mean, it feels like we're all like in each other's corners, and it's a great feeling.
Is it online, Sandra, or do you do it in person?
Well, we are online. We're online, and then I also am involved in another critique group that hasn't been meeting because of COVID, but that was a physical meeting. But yeah, it does eat into your time, but man, the friendships are amazing. Plus, iron sharpens iron, you know?
Well, yeah, there's some about it, like Christy could say to me, what you did right here, you were in the middle of an action scene and you just stopped it dead in its tracks with this weird little aside you put in. I couldn't see that, but when she do something like that, I could see it in her work. And we just both knew it's just something, a blind spot in your own work sometimes. And somebody reading it as a reader and editor just sees it in a way you just can't. I really thought she helped me so much, and I hope I helped her too. So
well, I'm certain you did. And I just want to mention that Debbie is in a critique group with me, and she's amazing. Debbie Sprinkle.
Deborah Sprinkle. Oh. Nice.
Yeah, I've worked with not formal critique group, but I worked with 2 mentors. So I had mentors along the way, and they still look at my stuff. I guess I just wasn't a critique group person, a writer. I don't know. You know, I never found a good fit. And I think that's really important too, is if you're thinking of critiquing, you know, make sure it's a good fit, because if it's not, it's just going to be a frustration. But it sounds like Sandra and Mary both got really lucky with their group.
Well, and our group, it was 4 people, and it changed a little. Christy and I were always in it, but people would come and go a little bit. And once in a while, you just get someone nice as can be, but they're not doing it right. You know, they're not, they're not doing stuff that's helpful to you. So anyway, yeah, it doesn't all work. You got to find the right fit.
I just never had any luck finding a group of people. I had to teach myself how to edit early on because I hired the wrong editor and wasted all my money on that, which is a whole nother story. And through that, just learned a lot about fiction writing. And I ended up in a critique group where several times I would be offering pages and pages of comments, and people would say, "Oh yeah, your writing's great. Can't wait to hear more." Now I have a couple of people that I swap with. So I guess technically we're critique partners. We're all really early and new in the publishing process, but we're all at the same point. So like Mary had said, we see things in each other's work that we don't necessarily see ourselves, but also it's just to get that feedback. Some, character that I think is fun and fabulous, everyone else is, my 2 opinion buddies are like, yeah, I don't really like her. So they can tell me what they don't like about her so I can go back and, tweak those things. But it's really important. I had to find a couple of people who are at that same point, and we have the same goals, because if your goal is to be published and write as a career, and you're with people who just want to write, their family history, you're going to get all different types of feedback and comments, and a lot of it might not be beneficial at all. So
that makes sense. Thank you all. All right, another question from the comments, and then I'm going to go to a few questions that I have on the side. Do you all have a backstory for your characters as the motivation for the way that they act and do things in the story?
See my head shaking. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But the backstory, I know all the backstory, but the thing you have to be careful with is in telling that backstory is that you're not backtracking so much that you're taking away from the forward movement of the book. But I think every character that you do in your book, you should have a backstory for. And that's it can be whatever you want it to be, because there's things you're going to know about your character that your reader might not need to know. Like silly things way back in their past or something like that. Because if it's not key to the story, then the backstory should stay backstory. But I have all my characters have some kind of backstory motivation that moves them forward in the plot.
One thing I've noticed, and I've done a lot of critiquing and contest judging, and it's a thing that a beginning writer does that they need to just not do, and that is they'll start the book out like with a woman driving a car somewhere and thinking about everything that she's done. I read this lady's book one time, and this lady driving her car, she's going to have lunch with her father, and she's thinking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words about everything that's brought her up to this point. And then she walks in and her father's dead, murdered in his office. And I said to her, that's the beginning of your book.
Exactly.
You need all this backstory, so you don't need to think it's wasted time, but you need to just cut it out of there and save it in a file and feed it in a half a sentence at a time or half a paragraph at a time, because it's a dead to a story. It just stops everything. But yeah, you absolutely have to have a backstory to explain their motivations, but you got to dole it out careful. So
when I work,
you'll never know. If you just the little hints that you give about your backstory can be something that one reader really resonates with, that they pick up on. They like this character because they have something in common with them, and it's not even the main character.
Whenever I, as an editor, work with writers, I always encourage them that they need to know their character so well that if you're writing a contemporary, you need to know, how is that character going to respond if she blows a tire and is stranded on the side of the road? Because if you understand her character that well, then whatever position you put her in the book, you'll know exactly how she's going to react, and it's going to seem natural and it's going to be believable. But I also tell them that 90% of the backstory that you create is never going to be in the book, and it shouldn't be in the book. That's just for you to know. And if you think it's really cool and it's something that everybody's going to like, use it as a reader magnet and write a little short story and give it away for free, something like that. But that's just part of the research that every author should be doing, is just to know. I mean, I keep notebooks, and I can tell you where every one of my characters went to college, what degree they got, if they were in sororities, if they were in honorary clubs, all of that, and you'll never see it in a book.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so now I have one individual question for each of you, so I don't want to run out of time, but this has been so informative and so amazing, and I'm really grateful for all the questions that you all have asked. These have been really good questions as well. Karin, you are transitioning from Christian to a traditional market. Can you explain more about the motivation behind that?
Yes, actually, Practically Married technically is with a general market publisher. And a lot of it is because I work for Iron Stream Media, who purchased Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas. It's just keeping an eye on the trends. And readers of Christian fiction generally identify as evangelical Christians, but the number of people in America who identify as evangelicals is shrinking. And I believe it was in 2017 when Chip McGregor wrote a blog post about just watching industry trends and kind of predicting a move more to like an inspirational fiction instead of the overtly Christian themes. And just really for me, it was a lot of prayer and deciding what I wanted to do, and came to the conclusion that I just want to write the good stories, but I want to be intentional, on my social media and on my website and things like that, that people know what I believe, what my faith is. So if anybody reads a book and says, well, why would your character ever say or do that? Well, here's my life, what inspires this. But a lot of it was just a business decision, wanting to tell good books or write good books that more people will purchase. And really, if you're wanting to break in, I mean, we all write romance. There's a huge market for just clean romance. That's why the Hallmark Channel exists, because people just want a good, clean story. So if you want to tell that clean story without the overtly Christian content, there's a market for it.
All right, well, thank you. Mary, you said that it took 10 years before you were traditionally published, right?
Yeah.
So you were the first one to write Westerns.
Well, I think I was real early to it. Yeah.
Yeah, very early to it. So how did you come up with the idea of writing Westerns, and how did you convince publishers? Like, why didn't you self-publish your book instead of waiting that long?
Yeah, we're going back a ways. There wasn't self-publishing. I mean, my gosh, when I started there, I didn't have the internet at home. Google wasn't invented for like 5 years after I started writing. I mean, it was just such a different world. I was lucky I had a computer. And what did you ask me again?
Why didn't you, okay, so now I see why you didn't self-publish, but how did you convince publishers that there was a market for it?
Well, whenever I went to ACFW, the American Christian Fiction Writers Conference, and I entered a lot of contests. And I kept doing really well, to the point that, especially with this one, Petticoat Ranch, I expected to win or be a finalist. It just always was. And I finally managed to get a judge in one of those contests who was also at this ACFW conference. And I pitched it. Now I look at it, and I mean, I have had lots of people interested in publishing me, but back then there was nobody. There was one person, they wanted one book. So yeah, I think they just were willing to take a chance because they really liked my voice. Back then they were saying things like historical Christian fiction is dead. And when I did a Western, nobody did Westerns, and the historical stuff was all real angsty and sweet and wonderful, like Love Comes Softly and things like that. Beautiful books, and mine are just kind of crazy. So it wasn't really what anyone was looking for, but I just managed to get somebody. I sold this book, and they like in the middle of June, they wrote to me and said, hey, we think we want Petticoat Ranch. Do you think you could get it to us very quick? And I said, well, yeah, today. I can get it to you today. It's been done forever. And I sent it to her. And I just had this mental image. This is back in the days when you print up your book and put it in a manila envelope and mail it to them. I just had this picture in my mind of some author, dying or blowing up somehow. And then they're like using my manuscript to keep the table legs from wobbling, right? And there's like, we need it right now. And they jerked my book out and said, let's print this, because it came out. I got it to them within a week of them asking for it in June, and it came out in February. And if you know much about the publishing industry, I mean, the catalog for Petticoat Ranch was coming out in like a month. We had to just do everything right on top of each other. So, and then it sold. So my little wobbly leg thing, it just ended up working out great for me. So anyway, yeah, because that was fast. Usually it's a full year. You turn it in, and a year later it comes out. And usually, like, I'm writing a book right now that's probably coming out in February of 2022. That's how far ahead. I'm writing it, and it's supposed to be in by February, and then it usually comes out. So that's how far ahead we work. that's the thing I love about indie pubbing, which I've done just a little bit about. It's just like, you're done, it's up. It's just a different world. So anyway.
Wow. Well, thank you.
So sorry.
No, you're good. That was awesome. Sandra, so you do a lot of research for your books, for the background of your books. Can you kind of go through a little bit of the process that you go through the research? I know you went to Gettysburg and that was part of it, but how do you do the research? Where do you start, or what's your process?
Well, I just start trying to find out what happened. If it's a battle, I find out the location. Let's just say Gettysburg. Who are the people who live in Gettysburg? What drove them down? What happened in the battle? How long did it take? I just start reading, and I follow all these rabbit hole trails. I check out. I probably check out 40, 50, 60 books from the library. I'll start with what I find, and I read a lot of those books at first, and then I notice that a lot of it, the information is somewhat repetitious, so I don't have to read it again. So I just start searching for new facts. And the things that I find fascinating, I think those things are that people will find fascinating, my readers. And that's I just look for the story. And I always go to the location. Well, I have so far gone to the location so that I meet the people. The museums are amazing. The people who care the most about what happened there, their own history, are the people who live in that town. And you always find somebody who knows something, and he'll sit there and talk to you, who wants to talk to you. And that's such a gift. I find that my research shows me the story, because my history is what I'm trying to portray. I learn the history of the story. I learn what happened. And it might be something that people don't know, because I go back as close as I can to like the 1860s when it happened. I read diaries, and I read journals, and I read soldier accounts and citizen accounts and everything that I can, that's as close to that time period as I can get. And I discover what happened. And then I take my characters, who are fictitious, and I drop them in. So it's a fun way to learn history, I hope.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Tracy, can you tell us why you said you do historical and Amish type of romances. Can you tell us why you chose that location, that setting for your stories?
The Amish. Well, it was a joint decision. My agent said to me, we were talking about getting contracts with Harlequin, and she said, I really think you should try Amish because of my historical voice, and it would be an easy segue into the contemporary genre, because as Mary said, we keep hearing historical is dead, historical Christian fiction is dead, which truly it is not, by the way. But so the Amish, I went kicking and screaming into the Amish genre, but I'm finding that I'm really enjoying it. And the New York State settings, that's really kind of my brand. So I was trying to stick with that. And I was very fortunate that Harlequin let me stay in the New York area. I mean, because we're not well known for the Amish, although we do have a large Amish community. We have large Amish communities in Western New York and Central New York. So that's kind of how I moved along to the Amish genre. I'm watching the time because I know we gotta.
I know, I wish I could ask more, but this was great. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you all for attending this panel. And the information for the authors is in the comments, their Facebook pages and where you can find them. Their books are in the bookstore. But thank you all so much again for attending and for being a part of it.
Thank you,